This video contains story and gameplay spoilers for Hi-Fi Rush and Evil West. Let me ask you a question. What would you consider dated in gaming? For some, it's a style of game that hasn't been popular in a long while. Maybe it's a mechanic or design decision that by today's standards seems tedious or annoying to deal with. Or maybe it's a game's visual style, either going for a certain specific art direction or something that's not as detailed as most modern AAA games you see today. Whatever your answer may be, most people seem to agree that it's not always considered a bad thing and can even add to a game's overall charm. And yet, a lot of people still tend to use dated in a negative sense when describing something. When I think about the current state of the game industry overall, I feel it's not that far off from how most people feel about the state of film. Both mainstream video games and films feel artificial, manufactured, made to milk as much money from audiences as possible without a care about quality. It's not to say everything is horrible. Both mediums see the occasional good mainstream or AAA release while having a ton of great releases from smaller teams. And there's nothing stopping anyone from taking part in stuff you may have missed and will end up enjoying. But it still feels like you really need to dig for that nowadays. And I think a good reason for that is the obsession with innovation within presentation and overall ambition. Games are so hyper-focused on story and insane graphical fidelity to the point that, in a lot of cases, the gameplay and fun factor tends to take a backseat nowadays. And it's not to say that those kinds of games are inherently bad or anything. There's certainly an audience for it, and it's not a bad thing if people do enjoy it. But I know I'm not the only one who has felt like the industry has been catering more towards creating games with insane visuals and emphasis on story, with gameplay so simple a toddler could beat it. When you look at how people discuss games nowadays, they rarely if ever focus on how it plays, but rather how it looks and what overpriced box it's available on. Combine that with the unnecessary injection of live service mechanics and microtransactions, and it now more than ever feels like playing a game can feel like a tiresome job. And as a result, we've begun to long for the more simpler days of gaming, before all of that came to light and publishers found out that that was the way to make money. Today, I want to focus on two games, Tango Gameworks' Hi-Fi Rush and Flying Wild Hog's Evil West. Two games that not only go against all those mainstream gaming trends, but also feel like unearthed cult classics from previous generations, reminiscent of a simpler era. And despite the widespread success of the former, I feel people have used the label of dated in an incorrect negative angle when critiquing these games, and in general we just aren't giving them enough credit for what they're doing and showing the industry. From the surface, you might be asking, what the hell do these two games even have in common? And while these two games may play and look as different as they possibly can, they have a lot more in common than you might think, and these factors all contribute to the special feel both these games share and just why so many see them as a breath of fresh air. To put it plainly, nearly everything about these games are simple yet unapologetically fun and confident in themselves. From the gameplay to the story and visuals, they all aren't anything groundbreaking or anything by current industry standards, but they all set out to accomplish one thing, and that's give you a fun, campy, over-the-top, and overall just unforgettable experience. Let's start off with the story. This seems to be a point of contention with both of these games since, as I mentioned, they are both rather simple, downright predictable even. But this doesn't make either plot bad, and that's because of both its lovable characters and especially its execution. I never really understood why in general people tend to give predictable plots such a hard time. You're bound to find a story predictable at some point of your life, even if others don't around you, and that's because we've all been hearing stories for different amounts of time throughout our lives. As you keep consuming media, you'll begin to pick up certain traits and cliches, and by a certain point you'll be able to put the pieces together for specific stories. Being able to predict a twist or event in a story doesn't mean it's poorly written, it just means you've been listening to stories for so long that you're able to pick up on stuff like that more easily. And for the most part, not only are these games' stories executed fairly well, but they also accomplish their job of keeping the player consistently engaged. And that's all the more helped by not only the style and flair both these games are just oozing with, but most importantly, the characters. Let's start with Chai. He's a cocky, dumb, wannabe rock star that, at first, many including myself assumed would be absolutely insufferable, with just how many other games been trying to do this kind of character as of late and have fallen flat on their face as a result.
I object to all this sex on television. I keep falling off. That's funny dialogue, that's comedy, that's an actual joke. In contrast, saying, "Oh great," when something not great is going on, or saying, "That just happened," after something happens, is not comedy. It's just a character being facetious.
But in reality, he ended up bouncing back and becoming many people's favorite part of the game, and I really believe that's because of the influences it pulls from. A lot of those other games tend to pull from the worst of the MCU when it comes to their protagonists, and while that style of writing may not have been super annoying a few years ago, it is for a lot of people nowadays with just how much it's been used. In contrast, Chai feels more like one of those go me, it's your birthday types you'd see in an early 2000s action cartoon like Ben 10 or American Dragon. Chai is fun personified, and combined with his dumb, yet positive and cocky mindset that always ends up wingy and coming out on top in the end, akin to someone like, say, Gallo or Kamina, and you've got exactly why he's so lovable. The surrounding characters are very aware of how dumb he is too, and the way Chai bounces off of them during interactions is not only funny, but legitimately nostalgic and charming.
You doing okay? You look more worried than usual.
For the first time in a while, I don't know what to do. But even worse than that, you seem to, which is a little frightening.
It's because you're too tactical. You think inside the box.
Oh, believe me, I've approached this from multiple angles.
Well, I'm so far outside the box, there's like no box. Just some sort of spherical thing.
Like a sphere?
No, it's even more abstract than that.
Okay, this conversation isn't instilling any confidence, so just let us know when you have your plan figured out.
And like Chai, Jesse Rentier is a similarly simple character as well. He's a grizzled, gunslinging government agent with a taste for combat and a hatred for bloodsuckers. Not that far off from some other FPS or action game protagonists, sure, but the action film hero attitude combined with an over-the-top Tesla-powered arsenal just makes him such a fun character to watch. And his sidecast isn't that bad either. Edgar, Chester, Amelia, and Harrow all bounce off of each other really well and are delightfully cheesy. You can tell in general just with both these games that the voice actors had a lot of fun recording and getting into the setting.
Cover me, Rentier! Damn you!
But let's talk more about that setting and overall style. Both of these games have their own unique look and setting that makes them stand apart from so many others out there right now. Evil West's myth meets Western meets Tesla setting alone feels so fresh and unique compared to other games that have attempted something similar. Sure, we've had games like Dark Watch and Weird West that combine Wild West and fantasy elements, but the way Evil West does it feels truly unique with its pure focus on vampires in a highly technologically advanced version of the Old West. I don't know if Tesla punk is a term that's ever been said before, but I'm coining it right here because I think it fits perfectly with this game. It's like steampunk, but with harnessing the power of gods. And the world building regarding the hierarchical structure of the vampires alongside the Rentier Institute and just how they deal with them is just such an interesting and cool cherry on top to what's already a visually awesome setting. You can ignore all of this if you want, since it really does just boil down to vampires suck and need to die a violent death, but the amount of thought Flying Wildhog put into this universe is really just awe-inspiring. It baffles me how some people really saw this as a negative and had the balls to compare it to the damn Senate scenes from the Phantom Menace just because they couldn't bother to listen to what the characters were saying.
That would explain why they attacked Baxter. They were protecting their source, the ancient blood they used to transform their familiars.
I didn't understand what you said.
And as for Hi-Fi Rush, I mean, come on, do I really have to elaborate? Just fucking look at this game. The anime meets Western animation comic book visual style just looks so awesome and looks even cooler in motion. It really feels like Tango took influence from both the animation style of films like Spider-Verse and what developers like ArcSys are doing with their fighting games and just decided to put it in a character action game. This game looks genuinely incredible from a visual standpoint, and the moments where it seamlessly switches from in-engine to hand-drawn 2D is so satisfying as hell to watch. I guess I could talk a bit more about the setting and world building while I'm at it. Even if it isn't as complex as Evil West with the sheer amount of lore you can find in every corner, Hi-Fi Rush has a ton of personality and comedy found within a lot of the readables and talkable NPCs you can find in levels. Yes, you can argue that the whole comically evil corporation cliche has been done to death, but I honestly couldn't help but smile at so many of these moments. From a PA announcement saying that sick days need to be scheduled 6 months in advance and how robots are exempt from this rule, to the simple meh reaction from ruining this one robot's perfect stack of boxes. I mean, listen dude, I can't help it, I need those gears.
You must disapprove of my work. Yes, I do not.
And what I find fascinating too is how Vandelay as a corporation isn't even totally evil at the end of the day. They were founded on positive principles with the intention to help mankind, but simply just screwed up along the way with the wrong people forcing their way into power. In nearly any other story, a company like Vandelay would just be portrayed as totally evil with no redeeming factors, but the fact that they have good intentions at the end of the day is honestly kind of refreshing.
Those were the good old days. Everything we did felt like it made a difference.
That's because it did.
And from the outside, no one knows any better.
But Kat, I hear you say, these games cannot match the realistic AAA visuals that are standard nowadays. This game is just a cartoon, and just look at Evil West's leech physics. Here's the thing, right? A lot of people seem to have this mindset nowadays that a game with a non-realistic art style or lower fidelity compared to other AAA games means that it has bad graphics, and I don't think that's right. And it's not to say that non-realistic or cartoony art styles aren't appreciated at all nowadays. Some of the most popular games out there right now have that exact sort of direction. But not only has there always been this negative stigma that cartoony games are for kids, but also the idea that a game with any kind of lower graphical fidelity is ugly no matter what. And you might be thinking, well duh, obviously, but there's a lot of people even to this day that puts a game's visual quality above all else, which is just really frustrating to see. I remember for a time I tended to roll my eyes at that whole I want shorter games with worse graphics and I'm not kidding image because, I mean, well obviously of course we want games to give us as much entertainment no matter what and look as visually appealing as possible. But really, thinking more about it, I think I took the whole worse graphics as games that just look objectively ugly, when really, it's more games that aren't as detailed as something like Red Dead or The Last of Us, and I find myself agreeing with that. My stance is that so long as a game's visuals are coherent and comprehensive, it can look however the hell it wants in terms of the detail. If the game looks cool and I can see what's going on clearly, that's all you need from me. And even at the end of the day, all of this is secondary to the real reason why these games truly shine.
We are Prodigy.
Here's another interesting similarity between these games. Both of them need to be experienced on hard for the real experience, since easy and normal just don't challenge the player enough if you ask me. In fact, that's really the only issue I have with both of these games, aside from the fact that their gameplay loop can be considered repetitive, which never bugged me at all. I'm not against easy difficulty options for the record, but the fact that what's considered normal barely challenges the average player is kind of a problem, and having a difficulty easier than that is honestly just overkill if you ask me. It's universally agreed by people who have played these games that what both of these games require on their respective hard difficulties is what makes them just so fun and especially so satisfying to master. You will die a lot in these games, from the beginning all the way to the very end. And mastering each game's combat loop as you consistently get more combos and upgrades is so gratifying. Even with Evil West's lack of a style meter, you take damage so fast on hard that you're naturally inclined into a playstyle where you do as much damage as possible while also ensuring you lose as little health as possible. Which means constantly changing how you prioritize different enemies in the arena, never standing still, and using every skill and weapon you have access to. Hi-Fi is similar in this regard too, not only with attacking on beat for the most possible damage, but also using as many different combos as possible to keep that damage output constantly flowing, which in of itself is why this game style meter is so useful. I honestly think a lot of people just selected normal expecting that to be the intended amount of challenge offered, and then just dropped it when they realized it wasn't challenging them at all. Even using the correct assist partner depending on the situation or the enemy that requires prioritization the most is super important too, and how it's all color coded for the character in question is really smart. Both of these games also have one of my favorite design ideals in gaming, where it introduces a new enemy like a boss encounter, only for them to become common enemies that you'll see for the rest of the game, which just makes overcoming them all the more satisfying. Of course, the argument a lot of people use towards all this is that it isn't exactly anything new. It's stuff that's been done before. But the twists these two games do with the character action formula are not only executed near flawlessly, but are also really unlike anything else out there right now. When's the last time you heard of a rhythm-based action game, or something combining the Old West with vampires? These games, despite being derivative of their respective genres in certain aspects, are truly unique. And I don't think enough people are truly giving these two games enough credit in that regard, especially in a time where the industry feels so stagnant creatively, and new IPs are a rare sight to see. Hell, I didn't even bring up the fact that these games launched at similar price points, just below the typical $60-$70 price tag you see nowadays. Isn't that something? These games genuinely have more fun factor and replay value than so many full price releases nowadays. Simplicity is desired more than ever nowadays, and these games are pure proof of that. If you don't take anything else from this video other than that you should absolutely play these two games, then make it this. The next time you play a new game and you hear the term dated being thrown around, think about the context of that, and ask yourself, is it really taking away from the experience, or is it really adding to it?
Your stupid ambition took everything from me. You turned my father against me and everything he stood for. That was a fate worse than death. I'm here to make sure you won't do the same to anyone else.